The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when Terence pointed to the door of the penthouse, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You leave with what you came with, Stacy. Absolutely nothing. No alimony, no assets, no dignity." He thought he had won. He thought she was just the quiet housewife who had ridden his coattails to the top of the tech world. He had no idea that the woman trembling in the foyer wasn't crying because she was weak. She was crying because she knew exactly who she was about to call. He underestimated her silence, and he certainly didn't know about the bloodline she had hidden for 5 years. When the courtroom doors eventually opened, Terence wouldn't just lose his fortune, he would lose his ability to breathe. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it hammered against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse like a judgment. Inside the sprawling residence of Terence Winslow, CEO of Winslow Innovations, the atmosphere was colder than the storm raging outside. Stacy stood by the marble kitchen island, her hands gripping the cold stone until her knuckles turned white. Across the room, Terence adjusted his cuffs. They were custom-made, silk, monogrammed with the initials DW, initials that the business world had come to fear and revere. But to Stacy, he was just the man she had fed instant noodles to in a basement apartment 6 years ago. "Are you deaf or just stupid?" Terence's voice sliced through the silence, devoid of any warmth that used to reside there. "I said, sign the papers and get out. The security team is already in the lobby. I'd hate for them to have to drag you out. It would look bad for the press release tomorrow." Stacy looked up, her brown eyes wide and brimming with unshed tears. She wore a simple grey cardigan and jeans, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her, the abstract art, the Italian leather furniture, the Baccarat crystal chandelier. "Terence, we built this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I sold my grandmother's ring to pay for your first server. I worked double shifts at the diner so you could code without distraction. You can't just erase me." Terence laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. He walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a glass of aged scotch. "Let's be real, Stacy. You didn't build anything. You kept the coffee warm. You paid the electric bill. That's distinctly different from being the visionary behind a billion-dollar AI infrastructure. I am Winslow Innovations. You are just the starter wife." He took a sip, savoring the burn, and turned his back on her. "And honestly, you don't fit the brand anymore. I need someone who looks the part. Someone who understands the world I live in now." The sound of high heels clicking on the hardwood floor signaled the arrival of the final knife to Stacy's heart. From the hallway emerged Tiffany, Terence's executive assistant of 6 months. She was wearing Stacy's favorite silk robe, the one Terence had bought her for their anniversary 2 years ago. Tiffany smirked, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. She walked straight to Terence, wrapping an arm around his waist. "Honey, is she still here? We have the gala at the Met tonight. I need to get ready, and this negativity is bad for my complexion." Terence kissed Tiffany's forehead, a gesture of affection he hadn't shown Stacy in years. "She's leaving now, Tiff. Go pick out some jewelry. Anything in the safe is yours." Stacy felt the air leave her lungs. The safe contained the few heirlooms she had left. Her mother's locket, the pearl earrings her father had given her before he passed. "Those are mine," Stacy choked out, taking a step forward. Terence's face hardened. He stepped away from Tiffany and loomed over Stacy. "Nothing in this house is yours. The prenup you signed, remember that? The one you didn't even read because you trusted me? It explicitly states that anything acquired during the marriage is sole property of the primary earner. That's me. You walk out with your clothes, your phone, And that beat-up sedan you refuse to sell. That's it. But I didn't sign a prenup, Stacy said, confusion warring with panic. We never had a prenup. We got married at the courthouse with 2 witnesses. Terence smiled, a predatory grin that chilled her to the bone. Oh, but you did. Last year, remember? The insurance documents and estate planning. Papers I had you sign when we bought the summer house in the Hamptons. Buried in that stack was a post-nuptial agreement. My lawyer, Preston Halloway, is very thorough. You signed away your rights to everything in exchange for a one-time payout of $5,000. $5,000? Stacy repeated, the room spinning. We are worth $3 billion. I am worth $3 billion, Terence corrected. You are worth 5,000. Now get out, or I call the police and tell them you're trespassing and becoming violent. You know who they'll believe. Stacy looked at the man she had loved for 7 years. She looked at the woman wearing her robe. She realized then that the Terence she knew was dead. Perhaps he never existed. She didn't scream. She didn't throw a vase. A strange, icy calm settled over her chest, replacing the panic. It was a familiar feeling, one she hadn't felt since she was a teenager, before she ran away from a life of suffocating expectations. Okay, Stacy said softly. Terence blinked, surprised by her sudden capitulation. Okay, I'll leave. Stacy turned and walked to the door. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't ask for the jewelry. She picked up her purse from the entry table. Don't forget your check, Terence called out, flicking a piece of paper onto the floor. $5 grand. Don't spend it all in one place. Stacy paused at the door. She looked at the check on the floor, then up at Terence. Keep it. You're going to need every penny for the legal fees. Terence threw his head back and laughed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Legal fees? Against who? You? You can't even afford a bus ticket, let alone a lawyer who can stand in the same room as Preston Halloway. Stacy opened the heavy oak door. The elevator awaited. Goodbye, Terence. As the door clicked shut, severing her from her life, she heard Tiffany giggle. God, she's pathetic. Do you think she'll actually try to sue? Let her try, she heard Terence say through the wood. I'll crush her. Stacy stepped into the elevator. As the numbers counted down to the lobby, she pulled her phone from her pocket. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a secret she had kept buried for the sake of a humble life. A life Terence had just destroyed. She scrolled past her contacts, friends who would now side with Terence, neighbors who would gossip, until she reached a number saved simply as the chairman. She pressed call. It rang once, twice. Then a deep, authoritative voice answered. Stacy, it's been 5 years. Is everything all right? Stacy took a shaky breath as the elevator doors opened to the lobby, the security guards watching her with pitying eyes. No, Lucas, she said, her voice turning to steel. He threw me out. He thinks I'm nobody. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of a glass being set down on a table. Stay where you are, the voice commanded. I'm initiating the protocol. And Stacy? Yes? I hope he enjoyed his life, Lucas said, his tone dark and final. Because it's over. The Bluebird Motel was located 3 miles off the interstate, nestled between a derelict gas station and a diner that smelled perpetually of burnt grease. It was a far cry from the penthouse overlooking the Sound, but at $45 a night, it was what Stacy could afford with the cash she had in her wallet. For 3 weeks, this had been her reality. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. Stacy sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the small television. The news was on. Winslow Innovations stock soars to an all-time high today as CEO Terence Winslow announces a breakthrough in quantum processing. In personal news, Winslow was seen leaving the Met Gala last night with rising fashion model Tiffany Blair, sparking rumors of a new power couple. Stacy turned the TV off. Her stomach growled. She had been rationing granola bars and instant coffee. The past 21 days had been a brutal lesson in how quickly society discards a woman without status. She had tried to access their joint bank accounts the morning after she left, only to find them frozen. Her credit cards were declined. When she went to the bank, the manager, a man she had hosted for dinner twice, wouldn't even look her in the eye. Mr. Winslow has flagged these accounts for fraud investigation, Mrs. Winslow. Until it's cleared, we cannot dispense funds. She had tried to get a job. She had a degree in art history, a degree she never used because Terence wanted a supportive wife at home. But everywhere she applied asked for references. Who could she list? Terence. She was ghosted by everyone. The friends from the country club, the wives of Terence's board members, they all stopped answering her texts. She was radioactive. A knock on the motel door made her jump. Stacy moved to the peephole. It wasn't room service. It was a man in a sharp suit, holding a briefcase. She recognized him immediately. It was an associate from Preston Halloway's firm. She opened the door, keeping the chain on. "What do you want?" The lawyer, a young man named Greg, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, held up a manila envelope. "Mrs. Winslow, Mr. Halloway asked me to deliver this. It's a final settlement offer. Mr. Winslow is feeling generous." Stacy undid the chain and took the envelope. She stepped out into the humid evening air, not wanting him to see the squalor of her room. She tore it open. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, so thick it looked like a novel. $50,000, the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. "In exchange, you sign the NDA. You are forbidden from speaking about Mr. Winslow, the company, or your marriage to the press or on social media. You will agree to an uncontested divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. If you refuse, Mr. Winslow will proceed with the fraud allegations regarding the joint account usage." "Fraud?" Stacy laughed incredulously. "I bought groceries." "Mr. Winslow contends you were siphoning funds to an offshore account," the lawyer recited robotically. "We know it's not true, Mrs. Winslow, and you know it's not true. But litigation takes years, and lawyers cost money. Money you clearly don't have." He glanced pointedly at the peeling paint of the motel door. "Take the deal," he urged, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Preston Halloway is a shark. He will bury you in paperwork until you starve. 50 grand allows you to start over somewhere else. Midwest, maybe." Stacy looked at the check. It was enough to rent an apartment, buy food, maybe go back to school. It was the safe option. It was the option that let Terence win. She thought about the nights she stayed up editing Terence's pitch decks because his grammar was atrocious. She thought about the time she pawned her jewelry to pay the patent lawyers when investors said no. She thought of Tiffany wearing her robe. She ripped the check in half. The young lawyer's eyes widened. "Mrs. Winslow, that is a mistake." "No," Stacy said, her voice gathering strength. "The mistake was Terence thinking he could buy my silence. Tell Halloway I'll see him in court. The hearing is set for next Tuesday, isn't it?" "It is, but you don't have counsel," the lawyer scoffed. "You'll be representing yourself against the best legal team in the state. It will be a slaughter." "I have counsel," Stacy lied, or at least she hoped she did. She hadn't heard from Lucas since that first phone call. He had told her to wait. He had told her to trust the process. But silence was hard to trust when you were hungry. "Who?" the lawyer challenged. Who would take this case on a contingency basis against Terence Winslow? Arthur P. Jenkins, Stacy said. The lawyer actually laughed. Jenkins? The strip mall lawyer? The guy who handles DUIs and slip and falls? Good luck, Mrs. Winslow. You're going to need a miracle. He turned and walked back to his Mercedes. Stacy went back inside and sat on the bed. She looked at her phone. Still no messages from Lucas. Had he forgotten? Had she been disowned by her family for so long that they decided not to help after all? She had walked away from the Poole family name 5 years ago. She wanted to be loved for herself, not for the billions her father and brother controlled. She had found Terence, a struggling dreamer, and thought she found true love. She hid her identity to protect that purity. Now that decision felt like the biggest mistake of her life. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was an email notification. Sender, Arthur P. Jenkins. Subject, court appearance, Tuesday. Stacy opened it with trembling fingers. Dear Mrs. Winslow, I have been retained by a third party to represent you in the matter of Winslow versus Winslow. Please do not worry about my reputation. Sometimes, a humble appearance is the best camouflage for a trap. Meet me at the cafe across from the courthouse at 8 a.m. Tuesday. Wear the attached outfit. A courier will drop it off tomorrow morning. P.S. Do not bring the settlement check. We are going for the throat. Stacy let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark parking lot. You want a war, Terence? She whispered to the empty room. You're about to get a world war. The morning sun that hit the peeling siding of the Bluebird Motel was weak, filtered through the perpetual grey haze of the city's industrial district. Inside room 104, Stacy sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the box that had just been delivered by a courier in a pristine uniform, a stark contrast to the surroundings. The box was heavy, matte black, and tied with a ribbon of deep midnight blue. There was no card, just the logo, embossed in silver on the lid. M. Her hand trembled as she undid the ribbon. She hadn't seen that specific logo in 5 years. It wasn't a brand logo, it was the family crest, modernized for the corporate entity that controlled half of the shipping lanes in the Northern Hemisphere. Poole Global. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a suit. It wasn't the flashy, revealing designer wear Terence had tried to force her into during their last year of marriage, attempting to mold her into a trophy. This was understated power, a navy blue blazer with a cut so precise it could only be bespoke Italian tailoring, matching trousers, and a cream silk blouse. Beneath the clothes lay a single file folder and a phone, a sleek, unreleased prototype that she knew her brother's tech division was working on. She picked up the file. The first page was a letter from Lucas. Stacy, Father always said you were too soft. He said you ran away because you couldn't handle the weight of the name. I told him he was wrong. I told him you ran away because you wanted to find something real. I respected that. I gave you your space. But this man, this Winslow character, he didn't just break your heart. He insulted the family. He treated a Poole like a beggar. That is an error in calculation I intend to correct personally. Put on the suit. Go to the cafe. Trust Mr. Jenkins. He looks like a mess, but he was Father's favorite pit bull in the 90s before he retired to handle private matters. He knows the law better than he knows his own children. I will be there. Timing is everything. L. Stacy ran her fingers over the silk of the blouse. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. She stripped off her worn jeans and the t-shirt she had been sleeping in. As she dressed, she felt a transformation. The fabric felt like armor. When she buttoned the blazer, she wasn't just Stacy. the discarded wife of a tech bro. She was Stacy Poole, daughter of the late titan of industry, William Poole, and sister to the current CEO, Lucas Poole. She looked in the cracked bathroom mirror. She pulled her hair back into a severe, elegant bun. She applied the minimal makeup she had left. The woman staring back was no longer the victim. She was the storm. At 7:55 a.m., Stacy walked into Joe's coffee spot, a greasy spoon directly across from the King County Courthouse. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee hung heavy in the air. She spotted him immediately. Arthur P. Jenkins was sitting in a corner booth, looking exactly as the young lawyer had described him. A disaster. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, with wild white hair that looked like it had been combed with a balloon. He wore a tan suit that was 2 sizes too big and stained with what appeared to be mustard on the lapel. He was currently dipping a donut into a cup of coffee, oblivious to the world. Stacy's heart sank. This was the pit bull? This was the man who was supposed to save her? She approached the table. "Mr. Jenkins." Arthur looked up. A piece of glazed donut stuck to his mustache. His eyes, however, were not the cloudy eyes of a confused old man. They were sharp, piercing blue, and alert. "Mrs. Winslow, or should I say, Ms. Poole?" He wiped his mouth with a napkin, not bothering to stand up. Sit. Want a donut? They're day-old, but the sugar rush helps with the cross-examination." Stacy sat, placing her hands on the sticky table. "Mr. Jenkins, my brother speaks highly of you, but my hearing is in 30 minutes. Terence has Preston Holloway. They're going to destroy us." Arthur chuckled, a wheezing sound. "Holloway?" "Yes, Preston. Flashy fellow. Good teeth. Terrible understanding of subsection C of the Marital Asset Division statutes regarding intellectual property." He opened a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived a war. Papers spilled out in a chaotic mess. "You see, Stacy, may I call you Stacy? Preston relies on intimidation. He thinks he's fighting a destitute housewife who can't afford a transcript fee. He's prepared a shock and awe strategy. He's going to accuse you of fraud, infidelity, maybe even throw in some mental instability claims." "He accused me of stealing money," Stacy said, her voice tight. "He said I funneled cash to offshore accounts." "Did you?" Arthur asked, his eyes locking onto hers. "No, I barely spent anything. I used that money to pay for his mother's nursing home bills before she died, because he was too busy to write the checks." Arthur smiled, a slow, terrifying smile. "Excellent. Do you have proof?" "No, I don't have access to the records." "I do?" Arthur tapped the side of his nose. "Or rather, your brother's forensic accountants do. We tracked every penny. We know where the money went. But we aren't going to show them that yet." "Why not?" "Because," Arthur leaned in, lowering his voice, "if we prove you're innocent right away, the judge dismisses the fraud claim, splits the assets based on the prenup Terence forged, and you get nothing but $50K. We need Terence to overreach. We need him to commit perjury under oath. We need him to claim, on the record, that he is the sole architect of his success, and that you were a detriment." Arthur checked a pocket watch that looked like an antique. "It's time. Let's go feed the lions, shall we?" The Superior Court of King County was a monolith of stone and glass, designed to make anyone entering feel small. Stacy walked beside Arthur, the click of her heels echoing on the granite steps. As they reached the double doors of courtroom 4B, they saw them. Terence stood near the water fountain, surrounded by a phalanx of lawyers in charcoal suits. He looked impeccable, radiating the golden aura of a billionaire in his prime. Tiffany was there too, surprisingly. She was wearing a modest dress, playing the role of the supportive assistant, though her hand lingered possessively on Terence's arm. Preston Halloway, Terence's lead counsel, was a man who looked like he was carved out of shark cartilage and self-tanner. He was laughing at something Terence said. When they saw Stacy, the laughter stopped. Terence's eyes raked over her. He paused at the suit. He didn't recognize the brand, but he recognized the quality. For a split second, a flicker of unease crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. "Well, well," Terence said, stepping forward. "You actually showed up, and you found a lawyer." He looked at Arthur Jenkins, taking in the mustard stain and the wild hair. Terence laughed out loud. "Stacy, is this a joke? Did you find him at a bus stop?" "Mr. Winslow," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly deep and projecting well in the hallway. "I am Arthur Jenkins. I'll be representing Mrs. Winslow. I suggest you save your witticisms for the judge. I hear Judge Percival has a low tolerance for theatrics." Preston Halloway stepped between them, smoothing his silk tie. "Arthur Jenkins? I haven't seen you in court in, 15 years? I thought you were disbarred." "Retired," Arthur corrected pleasantly. "I only come back for special occasions, like christenings or executions." The doors opened. The bailiff called out, "All rise." The courtroom was cold. Stacy took her seat at the defendant's table. Arthur sat beside her, unpacking his chaotic briefcase, stacking piles of paper that seemed to have nothing to do with the case. Across the aisle, Terence's team set up laptops, tablets, and neat binders. It looked like NASA Control Center versus a cluttered garage sale. Judge Percival, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, took the bench. She looked at the two tables. "This is the matter of Winslow versus Winslow," she said, her voice dry. "Petition for divorce and motion for summary judgment regarding asset division. Mr. Halloway, you are the petitioner. Proceed." Halloway stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't use notes. He owned the room. "Your Honor," Halloway began, pacing slowly. "This case is simple. We have a pre-nuptial agreement. We have a clear disparity in contribution. My client, Mr. Terence Winslow, is the visionary behind a global technology empire. The respondent, Mrs. Winslow, has not been employed for 6 years. She has contributed 0 capital to the marriage." He gestured to Stacy as if she were a stain on the floor. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Winslow has been engaged in systemic embezzlement of marital funds. We have bank statements showing transfers to unknown entities. Because of this breach of faith and the ironclad terms of the post-nuptial agreement signed last year, we ask that the court enforce the separation immediately, award Mrs. Winslow the agreed-upon sum of $5,000, and grant a restraining order to prevent her from harassing my client or his employees." Terence sat back, crossing his arms, a smug look of victory on his face. He wouldn't even look at Stacy. "Mr. Jenkins?" The judge looked at Arthur, who appeared to be doodling on a legal pad. Arthur stood up slowly, his joints popping audibly. "Yes, Your Honor." "Thank you." He walked to the center of the room, looking confused. "Mr. Halloway makes a compelling story. A visionary and a thief. Very biblical. However, we contest the validity of the post-nuptial agreement on the grounds of coercion and fraud. And regarding the embezzlement," Arthur paused, looking at Terence. "We would like to call Mr. Winslow to the stand immediately to clarify the nature of these funds." Halloway jumped up. "Objection. This is a preliminary hearing. There is no need for testimony. The documents speak for themselves." "If the documents speak," Arthur said, his voice suddenly losing its wobble and becoming sharp as a razor, "then they are lying. And since documents can't lie, the person who filed them must be. I want Mr. Winslow under oath." "Unless he's afraid." Judge Percival peered over her glasses. "Mr. Halloway, If your client is the victim of embezzlement, surely he can explain the details. Objection overruled. Mr. Winslow, take the stand. Terence sighed, an exaggerated puff of annoyance, and walked to the witness stand. He swore to tell the truth. He looked at the judge, giving her a charming smile. Arthur approached the stand. He didn't have a notepad. He just had his hands in his pockets. Mr. Winslow, Arthur began, you claim you are the sole creator of Winslow Innovations. The visionary, as your lawyer put it. I am, Terence said smoothly. I wrote the core code. I designed the architecture. I secured the funding. The funding, Arthur repeated. Interesting. And when you started the company 5 years ago, you were broke, is that correct? Living in a basement apartment? Terence shifted slightly. I had limited liquid assets, yes, like many entrepreneurs. So where did the initial seed money come from? The money for the servers? The patent filings? I saved it, Terence lied. He glanced at Stacy. And I took some small personal loans. From whom? Various sources. Friends. It's all in the financial disclosures. Is it? Arthur turned back to his table and picked up a piece of paper. Because I have a receipt here from a pawn shop in downtown Seattle, dated 6 years ago. It's for a vintage diamond ring, 1920s Art Deco. Belonged to Stacy's grandmother. It was pawned for $4,000. Did you know about this? Terence's jaw tightened. She volunteered that. To help with groceries. To help with groceries, Arthur repeated. Not to pay for the hosting of your beta platform. Because the bank records show a deposit of exactly $4,000 into your business account the same day the ring was pawned. It was a gift, Terence snapped. Spouses help each other. That doesn't make her a shareholder. True, Arthur murmured. But let's talk about the embezzlement. You claim she stole money recently. Where did it go? I don't know, Terence said, feigning distress. Offshore accounts, shell companies. She was hiding assets because she knew the marriage was failing. Arthur walked closer to the stand. The bumbling old man act was gone completely now. He moved with the precision of a predator. Mr. Winslow, are you aware that perjury is a felony? I am telling the truth, Terence spat. You mentioned transfers to unknown entities. Would it surprise you to learn that the recipients of those transfers were the Greenwood Care Facility? The courtroom went silent. I don't know what that is, Terence said, blinking. It's the nursing home where your mother, Martha Winslow, lived for the last 2 years of her life, Arthur boomed, his voice echoing off the walls. Stacy paid her bills every month because you blocked your mother's number after you made your first $1 million. You told Stacy not to waste money on the dying, so she paid it from her allowance. Is that the embezzlement you are referring to? Terence's face turned red. That is irrelevant. It's still unauthorized use of funds. It goes to character, Mr. Winslow, Arthur said. It shows who the real leech is. Objection, Holloway screamed, badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Percival said, though she was looking at Terence with a newfound distaste. Mr. Jenkins, get to the point regarding the assets. The point, Your Honor, Arthur said, turning to the back of the courtroom, is that Mr. Winslow believes he is the sole source of power in this room. He believes his wife is a nobody. He believes he can lie because he has more money. Arthur checked his pocket watch again. But he is mistaken about the source of the money, and he is certainly mistaken about who he is fighting. At that exact moment, the double doors of the courtroom swung open with a heavy thud. The room turned. Walking in wasn't just a lawyer, it was a procession. 2 massive bodyguards in black suits entered first, stepping aside to clear the path. Then a man walked in. He was tall, wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Terence's car. He had the same dark eyes as Stacy, but his were harder, colder. He carried an air of absolute authority that sucked the oxygen out of the room. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at Terence. He walked straight to the defense table and placed a hand on Stacy's shoulder. Terence stood up in the witness box, his face draining of color. He recognized the man. Everyone in the tech world recognized the man. It was the face on the cover of Forbes last month. "Who is this?" Judge Percival demanded, banging her gavel. "You cannot just barge into my courtroom." The man turned to the judge and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that felt more like a courtesy than submission. "Apologies, Your Honor," the man said. His voice was a deep baritone that rumbled through the floorboards. "I am Lucas Poole, CEO of Poole Global." He paused, turning his cold gaze toward Terence, who was now trembling. "And I am here to represent the interests of my sister, Stacy Poole, and to reclaim the capital investment my family made in Mr. Winslow's company." "Investment?" Holloway sputtered. "What investment?" Lucas reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, aged and yellowed. "The investment," Lucas said, "that Mr. Winslow signed 5 years ago when he took seed money from a shell corporation called Ventura Holdings. He thought it was an angel investor. It was me, protecting my sister's husband." Lucas smiled, and it was the scariest thing anyone in the room had ever seen. "And that contract, Mr. Winslow, has a clause. Section 4, paragraph 2. In the event of marital dissolution due to infidelity or moral turpitude by the recipient, the majority ownership of all intellectual property created with these funds reverts to the investor." Lucas dropped the document on the defense table. "I own your algorithm, Terence, and I'm here to take it back." The silence in courtroom 4B was a vacuum, sucking the arrogance right out of Terence Winslow. Preston Holloway snatched the yellow document from the table, his manicured nails digging into the paper as he desperately searched for a loophole. "This is preposterous," Holloway sputtered. "Ventura Holdings is a shell company. There is no proof Mr. Poole controls it." Lucas Poole didn't shout. He buttoned his jacket, projecting absolute calm. "Your Honor, the attached affidavit lists me as the sole beneficiary." He turned his cold gaze to Terence. "I created Ventura to help a man who had vision, but no money. I did it anonymously because my sister asked me to. She wanted you to feel you made it on your own." Lucas stepped closer to the witness stand. "I, however, did not believe in your character. That is why I added the morality clause." "You didn't read it, did you?" Terence's voice cracked. I skimmed it. But a morality clause usually refers to crimes." "Read the fine print," Arthur Jenkins piped up, holding his own copy. "Section 4. Dissolution of marriage due to moral turpitude or infidelity constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. Remedy: immediate reversion of all IP rights to the investor." "The algorithm," Terence whispered, the color draining from his face completely. "The core code. I wrote it while living off that money." "Exactly," Lucas said. "You built the house, Terence, but I own the land, and I'm evicting you." "Your Honor," Holloway shouted, "I move to strike. This is an ambush." Judge Percival adjusted her glasses, looking from the document to Terence with distaste. "The signature is clearly your client's, and since he admitted under oath that he barely reads contracts, I accept the validity of this instrument." She banged her gavel with the sound of a gunshot. "The fraud charges against Mrs. Winslow are dismissed with prejudice. All assets of Terence Winslow are frozen pending a forensic audit of the IP ownership. No! Terence screamed, leaping up. You can't freeze my accounts. I have margin calls. You should have thought of that, Lucas said, walking past him, before you threw my sister out on the street. Lucas stopped in front of Stacy and held out his hand. She took it, standing up not as a victim, but as a victor. She looked at Terence one last time. I told you, Terence, she said softly. You needed every penny for legal fees. Now you don't even have that. She walked out, her brother and lawyer flanking her. Behind them, Terence turned desperately to his mistress. Tiff, call the board. Tiffany shifted her chair away, clutching her purse. My phone is dead, she lied, her eyes fixed on the exit. Fix this, Holloway, Terence screamed as the courtroom emptied, or I'll ruin you. With what money, Terence? Holloway's voice drifted into the hallway as he packed his briefcase. Your cards are frozen. My retainer just bounced. The walk from the courtroom to the parking lot was a gauntlet of flashing lights and shouting reporters. Word had leaked that the great Terence Winslow was imploding, and the press smelled blood. Lucas shielded Stacy with his body, his security team clearing a path to the waiting black SUV. As the heavy door thudded shut, silencing the chaos, Stacy let out a long, shuddering breath. You okay? Lucas asked, loosening his tie. I don't know, Stacy admitted. I feel heavy. It's called justice, Lucas said. It has weight. He poured her a glass of water. But we aren't done. The court froze his personal assets, but he's going to try to gut the company before the audit team arrives. He'll try to transfer the source code and run. I know his type. What do? We go to the office, Lucas said, checking his watch. I called an emergency board meeting. As the owner of the underlying IP, I have standing. But you need to be there, Stacy. You need to walk in not as the ex-wife, but as the owner. Stacy hesitated. She thought of the glass tower where she had been treated like furniture for years. Then she looked at the determined set of her brother's jaw. Let's go, she said. The lobby of Winslow Innovations fell dead silent when they walked in. The employees, huddled in anxious groups, watched as Stacy Poole strode past the security desk. She wasn't wearing the stain-covered apron from her days bringing Terence lunch. She was wearing the navy pool suit, her head held high, her eyes sharp. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a CEO. They took the executive elevator to the 40th floor. The boardroom was already full. The directors looked nervous, checking stock alerts on their phones. Terence stood at the head of the table, disheveled and manic, shouting into a speakerphone. It's a clerical error. We need to authorize a transfer of the core assets to the Zurich server immediately. That would be illegal, Terence. Lucas's voice cut through the room like a blade. Terence froze. He turned to see Lucas and Stacy standing in the doorway. Panic flared in his eyes. Security! Terence roared. Get them out! This is a private meeting! Mike, the head of security, whom Stacy had known for years, stepped forward. But he didn't move toward Stacy. He moved toward Terence. I'm sorry, Mr. Winslow, Mike said, his voice flat. The court order just came through. You are not authorized to make executive decisions. You're frozen. I am the CEO. Terence slammed his fist on the table. I built this. Me. Actually, a board member named Margaret interrupted, looking up from her tablet. Without the IP rights, Terence, the company is just a shell. We have a fiduciary duty to stop you. Terence looked around the room, desperate for an ally. He found none. Then the door opened one last time. Tiffany walked in, carrying a cardboard box. Terence's face lit up with relief. Tiff! Thank God! Did you get the hard drives from the safe? Tiffany walked to the table and dumped the contents of the box. It wasn't hard drives. It was a stapler, a photo frame, and a half-eaten bag of almonds. "I'm resigning, Terence," she said coldly. "What? Now?" Terence sputtered. "We need to stick together." Tiffany laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "Stick together? You're broke, Terence. You're facing perjury. I signed up for the Met Gala, not jail." She turned to Stacy. "He's all yours, honey." She walked out, leaving Terence standing alone in the wreckage of his life. Stacy stepped forward. The room was so quiet she could hear the hum of the server banks in the distance. She walked the length of the mahogany table until she was standing directly in front of him. "You asked me once what I brought to the table," Stacy said, her voice steady. "You said I was just the starter wife." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the check he had thrown at her weeks ago, the pieces taped back together. She placed it gently on the table. "I brought the funding. I brought the loyalty. You brought nothing but ego." She turned to the board. "Effective immediately, Terence Winslow is placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. Security, please escort him out." Mike stepped forward and grabbed Terence's arm. "You can't do this!" Terence screamed, trying to jerk away. "I am Winslow Innovations." "No, Terence," Stacy said, turning her back on him. "You're just a line of bad code, and we're deleting you." As Mike dragged him into the hallway, Terence's threats faded into silence. Lucas pulled out the high-backed leather chair at the head of the table. "Terence's chair." He looked at Stacy. "Have a seat, Madam Chairperson." Stacy sat down. The chair felt big, imposing, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She looked at the stunned board members. "Let's get to work," she said. The dismantling of Terence Winslow's life was not an explosion, but a slow, agonizing erosion. In the weeks following the boardroom coup, the glass tower in Seattle underwent a metamorphosis. The name Winslow Innovations was stripped from the lobby wall, leaving behind ghost letters in the marble, faint, discolored outlines of a legacy built on a lie. Stacy, now installed in the CEO's office, sat behind a desk cluttered with audit reports. She had removed the sterile bachelor pad aesthetic Terence favored, replacing it with warm tones and functional art. "It's worse than we thought," Lucas said, tossing a thick binder onto the desk. He paced the room, his energy restless. He didn't just spend the cash reserves. He leveraged the future. "The company is bleeding, Stacy. We can liquidate the jet and the Hamptons estate to cover the short-term debt, but the real problem is the product." Stacy looked up from the red ink. "The quantum link? It doesn't exist," Lucas sighed, rubbing his temples. "The engineers say he's been bluffing for 6 months. It's vaporware, El. The stock is going to tank when we announce the delay." Stacy stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the grey Seattle skyline. "No, it won't, because we're not going to delay it." Lucas looked at her, confused. "You can't code a neural network in a week, Stacy. Even I can't do that." "We don't need to code it." Stacy turned, a sad smile playing on her lips. "It's already done." She walked back to the desk, opened her laptop, and logged into a secure server using a password she hadn't touched in years. 5 years ago, Terence hit a wall with the data compression. He was furious, breaking things, drinking until he passed out. While he slept, I went to his computer. I saw the bottleneck, a simple logic loop. I fixed it. She typed furiously, her fingers dancing over the keys. I created a shadow directory called Sandbox B. I've been working on the optimization protocols for fun. In the evenings, when he was out with Tiffany or ignoring me, I was building the product. She hit enter. On the large wall screen, a stream of complex, elegant code began to cascade. Lucas stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. He looked at his sister with a mixture of awe and fury. "You did this? You built the engine of a billion-dollar company, and he treated you like you were illiterate." "He saw what he wanted to see," Stacy whispered. "He needed a trophy, not a partner. So I let him have the glory. But I kept the work." Lucas laughed, a sharp, barking sound of vindication. "Does he know?" "No," Stacy said, "but he's about to find out." Terence Winslow was currently living in a studio apartment in a neighborhood he used to mock. The carpet smelled of wet dog, and the radiator clanked all night, denying him sleep. His bank accounts remained frozen, his credit cards dead plastic. Even Preston Halloway had withdrawn from the case after Terence's retainer check bounced. He sat on a folding chair, refreshing the news feed on his phone, obsessed with his own destruction. Headline: Winslow Innovations rebrands as EtherCorp. Stock jumps 15%. Headline: Stacy Poole revealed as hidden genius behind tech giant. "Lies," Terence muttered, throwing the phone onto the thin mattress. "It's all PR lies. She's a waitress." He needed money. He needed a way out. He had one card left to play, a copy of the old client database and source code on an external hard drive he had hidden in his golf bag. It was the only thing Tiffany hadn't stolen when she raided the penthouse. He grabbed his coat and the drive. He had a meeting set up with the CEO of Vortex Systems, his biggest rival. It was a desperate, illegal move, but he had no choice. He took the bus to the rendezvous point, a quiet bar near the docks. A man in a grey suit was waiting for him in a back booth. "Mr. Winslow," the man said, not offering a hand. "You have the data?" "I do," Terence said, clutching the drive. "Client lists, future projections, and the source code for the current build. It's worth 10 million. I'm asking for 2. Cash and a plane ticket." "I can do better than that," the man said. He signaled the bartender. From the shadows, figures emerged. They weren't bagmen, they were uniformed officers, and behind them, looking rumpled and delighted, was Arthur P. Jenkins. Terence froze. "What is this?" "This," Arthur said, dipping a fry into a cup of ketchup, "is a sting operation, Terence. Did you really think Vortex Systems would touch you? They called us the minute you emailed them. Corporate espionage is a federal crime, and since you just tried to sell proprietary assets that belong to EtherCorp," Arthur tosked, "that's grand larceny. Plus violation of the NDA. One of the officers stepped forward and cuffed Terence's hands behind his back. The cold steel felt like the final period at the end of his life sentence. "You set me up!" Terence screamed as they dragged him out. "Tell Stacy she's nothing without me." Arthur Jenkins wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Actually, Mr. Winslow, she's quite busy ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. She doesn't have time for petty criminals." 6 months later, the courtroom was different. It was a criminal court, harsh and unforgiving. Terence sat in an orange jumpsuit, looking older, his hair thinning. He had pled guilty to avoid a 20-year sentence, accepting 5 years. But the real punishment wasn't the prison time. It was the revelation. During the sentencing hearing, the prosecution brought out the Sandbox B logs to prove the value of the IP Terence tried to steal. The prosecutor projected the logs onto the screen. User: EM admin. Timestamp: 03:42. AM Nove 12, 2021. Action: corrected syntax error in core kernel. Rewrote compression algorithm. Terence stared at the screen. He remembered that night. He had been stuck on that kernel for weeks, only to wake up the next morning finding it worked. He had told Wired magazine he was a prodigy who coded in his sleep. "She fixed it," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. She fixed everything. He looked back at the gallery. Stacy was there. She wasn't looking at him with hate or pity. She was looking at him with indifference. She stood up before the judge, finished reading the sentencing. She checked her watch and turned to Lucas. "I've seen enough," she said. "Don't you want to hear the sentence?" Lucas asked. "It doesn't matter," Stacy said. "He's already in his own personal hell. He knows he was never the genius. That's enough for me." She walked out of the courtroom, the heavy doors closing behind her, shutting out the past forever. 3 years later, Le Jardin was the most exclusive dining establishment in the city, the kind of place where billionaires made deals over truffle risotto. Stacy sat at the best table by the window, overlooking the bay. Across from her sat a young woman, a scholarship recipient from the Stacy Poole Foundation. I don't know if I can do it," the student said, looking down. "Everyone in my class is a guy. They talk over me. They say I only got in because of the scholarship." Stacy reached across the table and took the girl's hand. "Let them talk. Noise is just noise. Data is truth. You do the work. You build the code. And one day, when they are stuck, you'll be the one with the answer." The waiter arrived to clear their plates. He was an older man, keeping his head down, moving with a shuffling gait. His white uniform hung loosely on his gaunt frame. "Would you like to see the dessert menu, madam?" the waiter asked, his voice raspy. Stacy froze. She knew that voice. She looked up. The waiter looked up. Their eyes met. It was Terence. He had been released early on good behavior, but his name was poison. No tech company would hire him. He had ended up here, working the dinner shift, serving the very people he used to command. His face went pale. His hands shook, the silverware rattling on the tray. "Stacy," he breathed. The restaurant went silent around them. Stacy looked at the man who had told her to leave with nothing, the man who had mocked her for being a waitress. The universe's sense of humor was cruel and poetic. Terence looked terrified. He expected her to make a scene, to get him fired. He braced himself for the humiliation. Stacy looked at him for a long moment. She saw the wrinkles, the fear, the broken spirit. "No dessert, thank you," Stacy said politely. "Just the check." Terence blinked, confused. That's it?" "That's it," Stacy said. She pulled out a black credit card, her own card with her own name. She placed it on the tray. Terence took it, processed the payment, and brought it back, trembling. Stacy signed the receipt. She stood up, gathered her coat, and smiled at the student. "Ready to go?" "Yes," the girl said. As they walked away, Terence looked down at the receipt. In the tip line, she hadn't written a zero. She hadn't written a curse word. She had written $5,000. And a note underneath? "To help you get started. Everyone deserves a second chance to be a better person." Terence stared at the number. $5,000. The exact amount he had thrown at her when he kicked her out. The settlement. He gripped the receipt, tears hot and real finally spilling down his face. He wasn't crying because of the money. He was crying because he finally understood what true class was. He stood in the shadows of the dining room, weeping for the life he had thrown away. Stacy didn't look back as she stepped into the cool night air. The encounter was a footnote, a closing of a ledger. She got into her car where Lucas was waiting. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," she said. "Let's go home." She had built an empire from the ashes of betrayal. She had turned her pain into power. She was Stacy Poole, and she had only just begun. What a roller coaster of karma. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and ultimate revenge, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Do you think Terence deserved the tip at the end, or should Stacy have left him nothing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching.